The neon sign of an all-night diner flickered on the outskirts of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, casting an eerie amber glow over two men sitting in a corner booth. Outside, the rain washed over the pine trees that bordered one of the largest military complexes in the world. On the table between them lay a single, unencrypted flash drive. Across from Special Agent Sarah Reyes of the FBI's Counterterrorism Division sat a quiet, nervous young man in a dark hoodie. He was a low-level intelligence specialist in an airborne unit, but to Reyes, he was Source Alpha. For 6 months, he had been observing something that didn't show up in standard readiness reports, a shadow network operating inside the barracks. Source Alpha pushed the drive across the table. On it were encrypted chat logs from a platform calling itself the Iron Order. It wasn't a standard political group or a fringe discussion forum. It was a disciplined, cell-based organization specifically recruiting active-duty infantrymen, combat engineers, and armor specialists. Their goal wasn't just ideology, it was tactical acquisition. They were leveraging the U.S. military's multi-million-dollar combat training to build an elite, radicalized core hidden within the ranks. Reyes inserted the drive into her air-gapped laptop. The files contained leaked doctrine manuals, encrypted radio frequencies, and weapon inventory sheets from an armory on base. The network was carefully using military-grade security protocols, tactical communications, burner devices, and coded language to bypass base security and NCIS oversight. As Reyes scanned the documents, one name kept appearing in the logs as the cell's regional strategist, a decorated Special Forces veteran turned private instructor, known only by the call sign Vanguard. The investigation was no longer a theoretical security inquiry. It was an active counterintelligence operation inside the most lethal military apparatus on Earth, and the clock was already ticking toward their next planned exercise. The secure briefing room at the FBI's Charlotte field office was cold, silent, and illuminated only by the glow of 3 high-definition monitors. Special Agent Sarah Reyes stood before a small, specialized joint task force comprising agents from the FBI, NCIS, and the Department of Defense Inspector General. On the screens behind her hung a complex web of flowcharts connecting military duty rosters, encrypted digital wallets, and satellite images of a remote 200-acre compound hidden in the mountains of western North Carolina. Reyes clicked a remote, pulling up a series of financial records and logistics manifests. The Iron Order was not just a collection of radicalized individuals venting online, it was a highly organized supply chain operation. Using his clearance and intimate knowledge of base logistics, Vanguard, now positively identified as former Master Sergeant Marcus Kane, had established a quiet pipeline. Night vision optics, body armor, tactical medical kits, and thousands of rounds of match-grade ammunition were systematically disappearing from base supply depots, logged officially as training expenditure or combat damage. The task force listened in grim silence as Reyes played an intercepted audio file recovered by Source Alpha. Kane's voice came through the speakers, calm, measured, and devoid of manic emotion. He sounded like any senior non-commissioned officer giving an operational order. He explained to his recruits that the military's current focus on global deployments made it vulnerable at home. His doctrine was simple. Let the taxpayers fund their advanced combat training, let the Pentagon teach them small unit tactics, and then redirect those skills toward their own subterranean agenda when the time was right. To avoid triggering internal alarm bells or alerting political commentators who might accuse the Bureau of targeting service members, the task force had to move with microscopic surgical precision. They couldn't simply raid a military barracks. Doing so without airtight legal evidence would cause an administrative disaster and allow the network to scatter. Reyes needed to catch the network in the act of a physical transfer. As the task force mapped out their surveillance grid, Source Alpha sent an emergency signal. Vanguard had just authorized an unannounced night training exercise at the mountain compound, and an arms crate was leaving Fort Bragg at midnight. The rain in the Blue Ridge Mountains fell in heavy, blinding sheets, muffling the low rumble of a dark, unmarked pickup truck winding its way up a gravel trail. Inside the cab sat two active-duty specialists from the base logistics division, their faces illuminated only by the green tint of the dashboard lights. In the covered bed of the truck sat two sealed wooden crates, bearing federal logistics tracking stamps that listed them as Class V demolition accessories. Scheduled for range destruction. 2 miles away, perched on a muddy ridge overlooking the remote compound, Special Agent Reyes stared through a long-lens thermal optic. Beside her, a tactical team from NCIS and FBI hostage rescue watched as infrared figures moved with military precision around the perimeter of the property. There were no makeshift fortifications or chaotic militia flags. The compound was laid out like a textbook forward operating base, complete with entry control points, overlapping fields of fire, and patrol schedules timed to the second. Reyes watched through the lens as Marcus Kane, Vanguard, stepped out of the main cabin to meet the truck. He wore standard tactical gear stripped of all unit patches, his movements measured and relaxed. As his men began offloading the crates, Reyes's team captured high-resolution footage of active-duty soldiers handing military-grade explosives directly to a civilian extremist network. The paper trail had finally met the physical reality. Then, the operation hit a sudden, deadly wall. A high-frequency radio scanner in Reyes's surveillance van buzzed with static, followed by an encrypted burst. Kane's perimeter guards weren't just using commercial radios. They were monitoring local law enforcement frequencies with a sophisticated signal interceptor acquired from an unknown source. Dry-by active, a voice crackled over the intercept. "We have thermal signatures on the North Ridge. Perimeter compromised." In an instant, the calm compound turned into an active defensive grid. Floodlights killed, figures melted into the tree-line, and Kane stood by the open crates, his hand dropping to his sidearm. Reyes's team was exposed on the ridge, miles away from immediate backup, holding the evidence that could dismantle the network if they could survive the next 10 minutes. The rain-slicked ridge descended into a tense tactical standoff. Through her thermal optic, Special Agent Reyes saw two armed figures flanking her team's position, moving through the thick brush using textbook bounds, one moving, one covering. Vanguard's men weren't amateurs playing war in the woods. They were combat veterans executing a calibrated ambush protocol. Reyes didn't order her team to open fire. Escalating into a firefight on a remote mountain ridge against a heavily armed, entrenched cell would play directly into Kane's hands, creating a bloody, chaotic scene that the network's legal defense could spin as an overreach by federal agencies. Instead, Reyes executed a pre-planned countermeasure designed for this exact scenario. She keyed her radio, transmitting a secure code directly to the regional DoD Inspector General Oversight Team. Within 30 seconds, the quiet mountain air was split by the low, resonant thrum of two heavy-lift helicopters hovering just above the tree-line. Floodlights from an FBI hostage rescue team helicopter cut through the storm, blinding the perimeter guards and illuminating the entire compound in stark white light. Over the loudspeaker, a federal officer announced the execution of an emergency federal search warrant, backed by an active-duty military police detachment. Caught under the glare of aviation searchlights and surrounded by federal tactical teams, Kane's discipline structure collapsed under its own tactical reality. The active-duty soldiers who had brought the explosives froze, the reality of a military court-martial and a lifetime in a federal penitentiary instantly crushing their ideological zeal. Kane made a brief move toward the open crates, but 4 red laser dots centered on his chest convinced him otherwise. He slowly raised his hands. As federal agents swarmed the compound, securing the stolen military ordnance, Reyes walked down the muddy trail to face Vanguard. The arrest was clean, silent, and executed entirely within the boundaries of federal law. But as Reyes watched the agents zip-tie Kane and his lieutenants, she pulled open a tactical binder recovered from the compound's main cabin, and realized that the Fort Bragg cell was only one node on an encrypted network map spanning 3 major military installations across the country. The raid on the Blue Ridge compound did not result in a dramatic public trial or a high-profile press conference at the Department of Justice. Instead, the evidence gathered by Special Agent Reyes triggered a quiet, deep-level purge across multiple military branches. Marcus Kane was remanded to federal custody under classified charges, while the active-duty soldiers involved faced court-martial under the Uniform Code of Military Justice for theft of government property, treasonous conspiracy, and violations of military regulations against extremist activities. The ultimate conclusion to this story is a cold, intelligence-based reality check. The infiltration of military structures by extremist elements is not a mass movement, but a calculated, professional effort to exploit specialized combat knowledge. When federal law enforcement and the Department of Defense analyze decrypted networks like the Iron Order, the primary concern isn't the political ideology discussed in online chat rooms. The true threat lies in the transfer of tactical doctrine, advanced weaponry, and operational security methods from state-sponsored armories into unregulated, shadow organizations. The military's challenge is inherently complex. It must maintain strict political neutrality and safeguard the constitutional rights of its service members while simultaneously aggressively monitoring the covert networks that seek to weaponize its training from within. As the surveillance vans packed up and the Blue Ridge site was secured, Special Agent Reyes submitted her final report to Washington. The Fort Bragg cell was dismantled, but the digital map recovered from Kane's cabin remained open on her screen, pointing to unverified nodes in Texas, California, and Germany. The counterintelligence mission inside the armed forces isn't a single battle. It is an ongoing, silent war waged in the shadows to preserve the integrity of the world's most powerful military.